Hello everyone, Minus here from Pantheon Plus, and before we even begin here, I think it's very important that I make something extra clear. This topic is not only a controversial one through the Pantheon community, but much like my video on LAS, it is one that I am very passionate about. So with that said, let's start with Pantheon's current stance on a transmog/appearance change system via the official FAQ. In the FAQ under 4.8, it says, what kind of equipment visualization should we expect to see on characters? The game world will contain thousands, if not tens of thousands of items. That said, there can never be a one-to-one ratio between what you are specifically wearing and how you appear to other players. What you're wearing does show off what you've accomplished, how high level you are, and what adventures you have undertaken to inspire others. Cosmetic gear will also be available, with players selecting how they want to view your character by toggling between adventure and cosmetic. So, like most of you who are probably listening right now to that quote, I feel that it's very vague in how it's worded. It appears by my interpretation that you'll be able to have a cosmetic set of gear and adventurer set of gear, which currently they are going to allow a toggling system to adjust on how you are viewed and how others view you as well. Now, I'm going to get into a lot more detail on that idea of toggling late in the video, but I think it's important to first discuss what I think the transmog system in Pantheon should look like, what it adds to a game, and how it affects the economy. After that, I will present anti-transmogging arguments that are commonly heard, as well as providing my counter to these arguments. So let's start by defining transmog as I feel it would be most well received and effective within Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. So let's start by talking about limitations and structure of the actual appearance change. A good transmog system needs to have strong limitations to keep class identity intact, as well as role integrity, such as tanking, healing, or DPS. This means that in regards to changing a piece of equipment's appearance, it should have to be within the same type. Simply put, a plate chest piece, for example, can only be substituted for a plate chest piece. This would of course work all the way down from plate to cloth. With weapons, the same sort of restrictions must apply. If your character has daggers equipped, then they should only be able to sub those appearance of the daggers for that of another dagger. In similar fashion, if you're using a sword in your main hand, you can only sub that for a one-handed sword of the same type. This means that a two-handed weapon can only be subbed for a two-handed weapon as well. Something else very important is that if, for example, a piece of gear or weapon is unable to be equipped, it cannot be used as an appearance substitute. This means that if gear is specific to a paladin, then a warrior cannot use this gear as an appearance substitute. Now the next question should be, how does one obtain the ability to substitute an item's appearance? And this is rather simple. If a player has acquired said gear, they would then have the ability to unlock it to use that piece of gear as an appearance or a substitution. Again, it must be something the character can equip to become part of their appearance or transmog book or interface, however that ends up becoming. This is where I believe transmog becomes a very important part of the economy. You see, in World of Warcraft, who has a pretty solid transmog system, it works well because items are soulbound once equipped. In Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, this is not the case, and instead, items are able to be sold, for the most part, to the auction house, or passed to other characters freely even after use. One would think that this presents a major issue with collecting transmog appearances, and then just trading them around to your group of friends or guildies. However, this difference in distinction from WoW to Pantheon is actually one in which Pantheon benefits strongly from. My suggestion would be this: in order to take the appearance of an item, it must be sacrificed to your transmog or appearance book, effectively removing the item from the economy and forcing a player to make an important decision of collecting appearances versus selling for currency. This will then keep the market stronger, as items would be removed from the game world via this system. I believe this is a huge win, even for non-transmog fans, who would then in turn see an increase to the value of their items they sell. Not just because they wouldn't be as flooded, but now because some people may want to purchase those just to add it to their transmog library. This even has a direct effect on crafters being able to find value in low-level gear, or older out-of-date gear that people would be interested in acquiring due to their appearance. I think that this is one of the most important pieces of the transmog system, and one that is not often considered. Keep in mind this is in direct connection with the following game tenet, which states, a belief that game economies should be predicated on delaying and minimizing item value deflation. So that's how I believe the system should look and work. With that said, now let's look at 4 different arguments against transmog, as well as my response to these comments. So number 1 is, I don't want to see a person dressed as a bunny running around or skimpy costumes. Okay, so let's start with a quote before we even dig into this any further. This quote is from Chris Joppa-Perkins from the March 2018 newsletter discussing the game's overall look of armor in the game. He was asked during this newsletter, how would you describe the overall look of the game's armor? Chris stated, we've landed on a believable fantasy, or perhaps you could say a realistic fantasy approach to our armor design. What this means is that the armor should be appropriate for a fantasy setting, but not over the top to the point of being cartoonish. This aesthetic fits well within our world overall and allows for eye-catching pieces to truly be eye-catching. And a second question he was asked from the same article, will there be role-playing armor, such as formal garb, farmer overalls, dresses, etc.? Chris stated, I think that our audience would enjoy this. We have no definite plans for these items by launch, but I know it's something that the team would like to add when there is time to do so. As you can see from this quote, the team at VR is all about designing a realistic armor. But furthermore, in the FAQ, there's another point, which is tied heavily to the skimpy outfits debate. And here's what they say. Section 4.4 of the FAQ asks, will the female character models be as attractive as depicted in the races section? And they answered as followed. We sure hope so. The female playable characters in Pantheon brings up an important point. They will be very attractive, heroic in appearance, a persona that anybody could look up to, but they will not be overly sexualized. We want all players to be proud of their character and their appearance. Here is one last quote from Visionary Realms, this time from Kilson back in 2017 over at the forums, where he discusses armor that is appropriate for roles. He was asked if there would be options for appearance via gear, and this is what he said. We will give you folks options, but expecting any race to tank in board shorts will end badly. If a cleric has a powerful buff to give you armor, then no one else in the game would need it either. No matter what your race or class is, if you want to tank, you will need to wear the appropriate gear to withstand such large blows and magical forces, no matter where you come from, including the sea. There's nothing stopping you from taking that gear off to walk around towns, or when you travel, or when you're relaxing at an inn. But in combat, you will need to dress appropriately or you will suffer the consequences. So why am I reading all these quotes to those of you still watching? It's simple. Visionary Realms has a very high standard on realistic gear that fits the world of Terminus and blends nicely into the feel of the overall world they're creating. The worry of all these obscene and over-the-top outfits really typically stem from Asian MMORPGs in which are not reflective of a Pantheon at all, or even World of Warcraft. That said, I'm aware of World of Warcraft is much more stylized or cartoony in a sense, and can create some sexy outfits from time to time, but I can't see this being a thing in Pantheon. Due to these direct quotes and many other examples of the overall game aesthetic, I believe these fears are highly overvalued, overstated, and uneducated when it comes to discussing it within the realm of Pantheon. So topic number 2 from the anti-transmog crowd is that I want to see epic items, and transmog will take away from that. As an avid transmog fan, I couldn't disagree more with this comment. In every MMORPG, there's always the next piece of gear you are after. Even if you get the best of the best for your gear, you often have various sets of gear for various different builds or loadouts or situations. Add to that, as the game continues on, and there are various expansions, gear will be replaced. Now let me be clear that I am very well aware of the subset of fans and even developers who have talked about the fact that gear will not be replaced as often as it is in current MMORPGs. But regardless, eventually it will be replaced. Think about playing the launch of Pantheon and being one of only 5% of the player base to get a special flaming sword, for example. Let's say that sword is immensely powerful and a token of a great achievement. I'd venture to guess that even those players that got that sword would be proudly showing it off instead of transmogging over the top of it if there was a transmog system. This goes for really any rare items that look cool or are a symbol of a great achievement. That said, eventually that item is not going to be as powerful and it will be replaced. Transmog keeps the memory and the overall value of that weapon alive forever. Imagine you were one of the 5%, and in a future expansion you replace it with a rather simplistic Claymore-style two-hand sword. A sword that doesn't have the same appeal, achievement, or look of power. You would then have a decision to make. Do you sacrifice your rare sword to your parents' transmog book? Do you try to sell it? Even though you know it now has diminished value. If you choose to sacrifice this item and keep its appearance, you can now put that over the replacement item to show off that you were one of the few that achieved collecting that amazing two-handed flaming sword. This works for all types of items, and in my opinion continues on the memory of rare and exciting items, when they've lost their luster by being replaced with future content or even the next content. Again, being slightly repetitive, imagining venturing out in the world with your flaming two-handed sword 6 years after the game's release, holding a rare year 1 sword, where every single person that stops by you will say, "Oh, where did you get that?" That won't happen without transmog, because that item won't be valuable, and thus won't be equipped. Number 3 is, I want to see what someone is wearing so I know how strong they are. So the more I dig into this conversation in particular, it's largely around PvP or pugging, where someone wants to see the gear of someone before engaging in combat or before inviting them into a group. So let's break down both sides. So first, here is VR's stance on PvP via the official FAQ on their site, and I'm going to read this whole thing for a very important line at the end. So in section 16 they ask, will there be PvP? And here's their response. Pantheon is primarily a PvE, player versus environment game. In fact, when we say environment, we don't just mean NPCs, but also contending with climates and atmospheres, the very world itself. That said, we understand a portion of our target audience also enjoys player versus player. Our experience is that separate PvE and PvP shards is the answer. However, it is too early to predict how many PvP shards would launch with it. That being said, we will definitely launch with at least one player versus player shard. Now here's the important line. It is also worth mentioning that when we do eventually focus on PvP, we will do so with tweaks and changes to classes in order to make PvP more fun, which will not affect the balance of Pantheon's PvE experience. They go on to say as the game continues to grow, there could be additional variations of PvP shards and more attention paid to the unique gameplay mechanics associated with PvP. So if the whole reason that there's a toggle, which again, we'll talk about later, or transmog is dismissed so that PvP players can be safer in engaging others, then this FAQ stance would be completely null and void. Last I checked, Pantheon was being made to an immersive world where your character matters, where your reputation matters, and where there is individuality among races, classes, and players. If this PvP reason is a reason to dismiss transmog, then I would be vastly disappointed, because it's simply not in line with the game's goal of the PvE experience first. In regards to the second point, in which players say they want to be able to see what type of gear someone has before they invite them, then this argument also confuses me. Pantheon praises itself on being a socially engaging experience, something that's been missing in MMORPGs. To me, this just feels like eye level in World of Warcraft or other current MMORPGs, where using a number, whereas in this case a look, is what validates a player's skill level. What's most interesting here is that given that we will be able to inspect players, it would take nothing more than a simple text command to see their true gear. So when I look at this argument of I want to see what they're wearing when it comes to inviting people into a group, is extremely off base to the basic concept of Pantheon, encouraging social interaction, where players' skill and role can supersede all. To me, this sounds like the same people complaining about eye level making a case for a system just like it. Now the last part of this is people that want to see the gear so that they can inquire how to get it or see something that encourages them to go out searching. I argue that transmog does the same thing, if not more, but I can understand how it wouldn't be exactly the same thing. Out of the 3 cases around seeing gear, this one is a semi-solid argument, but I think that if gear is designed well, you'll see a lot of gear that's not transmogged over, especially if the pieces are an achievement, as in a sense of acquiring it. For example, fresh high-end gear is typically worn, so players can show it off. What it would do, however, is add value to gear you may have never seen before, or could go back and try to get later in the game's life. And the final argument here is that transmog leads to a cash shop. This is such a tiring argument used against so many design decisions. Mounts, pets, transmogs, there's so many more, but it's always the same thing. In this case, people say that the best armor will be designed to look bad, so you have to buy these best looks. And that's just simply not true. It's fear-mongering. And while there are some Korean MMORPGs out there that do this, this is not typical of North American designed RPGs. And more so, it's not reflective of the ideals of Visionary Realms, which seem to be completely ignored. Here's some information from the FAQ. In section 15, the question is, what is Pantheon's revenue model? Will the game be pay-to-play, free-to-play, freemium, or what? And they answer with the following. We are considering either using the traditional subscription-based model or a model where the player buys the game and then has the option of purchasing mini expansions or modules after launch. Either way, the game's world will continue to expand, more content will be added, as well as new features and mechanics. Visionary Realms strongly believes that the revenue model of an MMO needs to match the game's target audience. Because of this, Pantheon will not be freemium or have cash shops. Building your character and advancing in-game will be based off time invested and tactics used, not how much money the player has in real life. I don't have much more to say on this debate from the anti-transmog crowd, except for that this is without a doubt the most I heard it on Reddit echo chamber argument in the world. It's a blanket edge case argument people use for anything they don't like that has been in a cash shop before. If Pantheon has come out and said no cash shop, how is this even valid? Even if there were a cash shop, it wouldn't invalidate any of the things I've said before this part of the video, so let's be clear though. Visionary Realms has stated no cash shop. A transmog system does not equal a cash shop. There is zero proof of this, especially as I'm proposing it, is the fact that WoW's system is pretty similar and doesn't have any effect on a cash shop. So let's move on from the arguments against transmog, and I'll do my best to sum up this whole argument in video. Pantheon is being created as a living, breathing world, in which we as players are set to experience and be a part of. It is supposed to be an escape into the fantasy world, where we can live out the character of our choice and be a part of a living, breathing community where reputation and character individuality matters. We are all supposed to carve our own play out into the world, whether famously or infamously. As Brad once said, he's making worlds, not games. And in my opinion, how we look at characters in the world is a huge part of making the world feel alive. Could you imagine Eredune without the green armor and the flaming swords? Think about that. Transmog, in my eyes, adds hours of gameplay for players of all types seeking to customize their look. It breathes life into the older content that can at one point become overlooked as players group up to venture into the past to acquire special items and looks. With my suggestion of sacrificing to acquire the item's appearance, it breathes fresh life into the economy, keeping item rarity up and furthermore driving reasons for players to buy gear that may be otherwise out of date. It helps crafters selling unique looking equipment to continue to profit from special items, even when they are not in demand because of the current challenge level of the game. Perhaps the biggest thing is, a pure transmog system hurts nobody and benefits so many. I am not a role player, but how my character looks still matters to me, and I think people out there feel the same way I do. To the players out there that perhaps don't care how they look, I ask, how does this affect you in any way from a gameplay standpoint? Whereas in the reverse, it adds hundreds of hours of gameplay and goals to so many players within the world. Not every creation in the MMORPG genre since EQ has been bad. Some in fact have been truly revolutionary and impactful, and transmog is one of them. Simply casting everything out after EQ as a, quote, crappy modern MMORPG, end quote, system, or blaming every new system for the death of an MMORPG, I'd argue that nothing is more RPG than how our character looks within the game world. With restrictions to what appearances can be substituted, keeping identity and role and class integrity in check, this is a system that gives players so much more to do, when not just chasing the next piece of loot or meeting up for a dungeon or raid. Never discount a system that causes a player to want to spend more time in the world doing something they enjoy, whether it's something you enjoy or not. Now on to my final point. With all that being said, Visionary Realms has proposed a toggle system in order to please players on both sides of the equation. And I have a very hard stance on this. Putting in a toggle system that takes how an individual player looks out of their own hands and instead places it into others is a massive mistake. Not only does it invalidate the entire system, but stripping a player's control of how they are perceived in the world kills player identity in every way, shape, and form. The toggle system in my eyes is so damaging that I'd prefer not to even have a transmog system than to have it exist with a toggle. Putting a toggle on and knowing people could just look at you how they want rather than how you have earned to look completely invalidates the effort of building within the transmog system. While some may see it as a compromise, it's far from that. It's a way to basically shut off the hard work of players who invest in the system. So that's my take. What do you guys think? Did I change your opinion at all? Did I say anything that makes you feel better about transmog? Can we get away from using the everyone looks like sexy bunnies argument? Can we trust in Visionary Realms as we have for so long to get away from this cash shop fear? Can we understand that it shouldn't just be based on what people look like in order to join your group, and instead possibly a social interaction along with the player's skill at performing their role? Remember, Pantheon is supposed to be different. That's why we're all here. So let me know what you think of the video and share your thoughts below. Thanks, guys.